Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn of 1247 Maple Drive, where Daniel Morrison stood watching his 17-year-old son Kyle trudge toward the school bus. Something was off. In the sweltering July heat, Kyle wore a long-sleeved hoodie pulled tight around his thin frame, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Daniel Morrison had built his life on reading people. 23 years as a private military contractor had taught him that survival depended on noticing what others missed. The slight tremor in Kyle's hands, the way he avoided eye contact, the defensive posture, all red flags that Daniel's wife Linda had dismissed with a casual wave. "He's just going through a phase," Linda had said that morning, barely looking up from her phone as she sipped her coffee. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the ceramic mug, a habit that had begun to grate on Daniel's nerves over the past 6 months. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched the bus disappear around the corner. Linda Morrison, once the devoted wife who had waited faithfully through his deployments in Afghanistan and Syria, had become a stranger. The woman who used to greet him with passionate kisses and home-cooked meals now offered distracted pecks on the cheek and takeout containers. At 45, Daniel still maintained the physique and discipline of his military days. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his mind was always calculating, always planning. Those skills had kept him alive in places where mercy was a luxury and hesitation meant death. Now, those same instincts were screaming that something was poisoning his family from within. The Morrison family appeared perfect from the outside: a successful security consultant, his beautiful wife who ran a boutique marketing firm, and their honor roll son headed for an Ivy League college. They lived in Willowbrook's most prestigious neighborhood, drove luxury cars, and attended the right social events. But Daniel knew that facades were often the most dangerous lies. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Trevor Walsh. "Client meeting moved to 3 p.m. The Henderson contract needs your touch." Daniel's security consulting firm had grown exponentially since he'd left the military, thanks largely to his reputation for handling delicate situations that required unconventional solutions. But today, Daniel's focus wasn't on corporate espionage or executive protection. Today, his paternal instincts were in overdrive. Kyle had always been open with him. They'd shared everything from baseball stats to college aspirations. This sudden withdrawal coincided perfectly with Linda's own emotional distance, and Daniel didn't believe in coincidences. He walked back into the house, noting how Linda quickly minimized whatever she'd been looking at on her laptop screen. She glanced up with that perfectly practiced smile that had once melted his heart, but now felt calculated. "Don't you have that big client presentation today?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes not quite meeting his. "Later," Daniel replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm worried about Kyle." Linda's laugh sounded forced. "Oh, honey, you're being paranoid. Remember when you thought the neighbors were surveilling us because their landscaper came twice in 1 week?" The deflection was expertly done, but Daniel caught the micro-expression of annoyance that flashed across her face. In hostile territories, he'd learned to trust his gut above all else, and his gut was telling him that his wife was lying. "Maybe," he conceded, standing up. "I'm heading to the office early. See you tonight." Linda's relief was almost palpable. "Okay, sweetie, I have that big campaign launch today, so I might be late." Another lie. Daniel had checked her company's website that morning. No major campaigns were launching. As he grabbed his keys, he made a mental note to have Trevor run a discreet background check on Linda's recent activities. Trust but verify. It had been his motto in the field, and it would serve him well now. As Daniel drove toward his office, he couldn't shake the image of Kyle's fearful eyes. Whatever was happening in his house, whatever had driven his son to hide beneath long sleeves in the summer heat, he would uncover it. And when he did, God help anyone who had hurt his family. The Daniel Morrison who had earned 3 commendations for his work in classified operations wasn't the type of man who forgave easily. He was the type who planned meticulously, struck precisely, and never left loose ends. If someone was threatening his family, they had made a fatal miscalculation about who they were dealing with. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 3 days later, Daniel's suspicions crystallized into cold, hard certainty. It started with Kyle's laundry. Daniel had come home early from a client meeting, using his key to enter quietly, an old habit from his tactical days. The house was supposed to be empty. Linda was allegedly at a conference in Portland, and Kyle was at soccer practice. But as Daniel moved through the hallway, he heard the washing machine running. Rounding the corner into the laundry room, Daniel found Kyle frantically scrubbing at a white dress shirt, one of the expensive ones Linda had bought him for formal events. But the shirt wasn't white anymore. Dark red stains spread across the fabric like abstract art, and Kyle's hands were shaking as he worked. "Dad!" Kyle jumped, nearly dropping the shirt. I didn't know you were home." Daniel's trained eyes took in everything. The fresh bruise on Kyle's left temple, barely concealed by carefully arranged hair. The split lip that explained the long sleeves. Kyle was hiding more injuries, and most telling of all, the look of pure terror in his son's eyes. "Kyle," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that had made enemy combatants surrender without a fight. "What happened?" "Nothing, Dad. I had a nosebleed. You know how they are in this heat." Another lie, but this one broke Daniel's heart. His son was protecting someone, and that someone had hurt him badly enough to leave blood on his clothes. "Son, look at me." Daniel stepped closer, and Kyle instinctively flinched, a reaction that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Who did this to you?" Kyle's composure cracked. "Please, Dad. Please don't ask. It'll only make things worse." "Worse for who?" Kyle's silence was answer enough. Someone had threatened his son into silence, and Daniel's mind was already racing through possibilities. Bullies at school? A teacher with boundary issues? Or something closer to home? "Where's your mother supposed to be right now?" Daniel asked. "Portland. That conference thing." Kyle's response was automatic, rehearsed. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed Kyle the screen. Linda's location, visible through the family tracking app she'd insisted they all use for safety. The dot pulsed steadily from the Riverside Hotel, 15 minutes across town. Kyle's face went ashen. "Dad, please. You don't understand." "I understand plenty." Daniel's voice had taken on the edge that used to make enemy insurgents reconsider their life choices. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." "Dad, no. You can't." "Kyle." The single word carried 23 years of command authority. "Room. Now." As Kyle hurried upstairs, Daniel's mind shifted into tactical mode. His wife was lying about her location. His son was being hurt by someone who'd threatened him into silence, and all of it was happening under his roof. The same instincts that had kept him alive in Kandahar were now screaming for blood. Daniel walked to his home office, a room Linda never entered because it contained his boring work stuff. Behind a false panel he'd installed himself was a collection of items from his previous career: surveillance equipment, untraceable communication devices, and a few tools that weren't exactly legal in civilian hands. He selected a miniature camera, military grade, undetectable to civilian bug sweepers, and headed to Kyle's room. His son was sitting on his bed, arms wrapped around his knees, looking younger than his 17 years. "Kyle, I need to put something in your room. For your protection." "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good. Someone should be scared right now. And it's not going to be you." Daniel's eyes were cold as winter steel. "This camera will record everything. If someone is hurting you, I need evidence." Kyle's protest died when he saw his father's expression. Daniel Morrison in protective mode was a force of nature, and Kyle had inherited enough of his father's instincts to recognize when resistance was futile. Daniel positioned the camera with military precision, hidden in Kyle's bookshelf with a clear view of the room and window. The device would upload everything to an encrypted server, accessible only through Daniel's secure network. "Dad," Kyle's voice was small. What if the person hurting me is someone you care about?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. His son's carefully neutral phrasing, the way Kyle couldn't meet his eyes, the timeline of Linda's strange behavior. Suddenly, the pieces began forming a picture that made Daniel's vision narrow with rage. "Kyle," Daniel said, his voice deadly calm, "if anyone, and I mean anyone, has hurt you, they will answer to me. Blood relation, marriage vows, whatever connection they think protects them, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is that you're my son, and I will burn down the world before I let someone hurt you." Kyle began to cry then, not the tears of a teenager embarrassed by parental concern, but the broken sobs of a child who'd been carrying an unbearable secret. Daniel gathered his son in his arms, noting the way Kyle winced when pressure was applied to his ribs. "It's going to be okay," Daniel whispered, though his mind was already cataloging ways to make someone pay. "Daddy's going to fix this." That night, Daniel sat in his office, watching the camera feed from Kyle's room on one monitor while tracking Linda's location on another. She was still at the Riverside Hotel, supposedly at a conference that didn't exist. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text from her. "Conference running late. Staying overnight. Love you." Daniel stared at the message, then at the hotel's website showing a vacancy rate of only 60%. Whatever Linda was doing, she wasn't doing alone. He opened a secure messaging app and typed a message to Trevor. "Need a full surveillance package on Linda Morrison. Real-time location, communications, associates. Highest priority." Trevor's response came within minutes. "Jesus, Dan. You sure about this? Never been more sure of anything in my life." As Daniel prepared for what might be the longest night of his life, he made himself a promise. Whatever was happening to his son, whoever was responsible, they had just declared war on the wrong man. Daniel Morrison had ended insurgencies with less motivation than this. Tomorrow, he would begin hunting, and unlike his previous wars, this one was personal. Chapter 3. The night everything changed. The camera had been recording for exactly 18 hours and 37 minutes when Daniel's worst fears materialized on his computer screen. He'd been reviewing the footage frame by frame, looking for any clue about Kyle's injuries, when the timestamp hit 2:14 a.m. Kyle was asleep, buried under blankets despite the summer heat, probably to hide his injuries, even from himself. That's when Daniel heard it, the soft click of his front door opening. Someone was in his house. On the camera feed, Daniel watched Kyle stir, but not wake as footsteps approached his room. The door opened slowly, deliberately, and a figure slipped inside. The infrared camera captured everything in stark detail as the intruder moved toward Kyle's bed. Daniel's blood turned to ice water when he recognized the silhouette. Linda, but she wasn't alone. A second figure followed, taller, broader. Male. In the camera's green-tinted display, Daniel watched his wife and a stranger approach his sleeping son. The man's face came in a clear view as he leaned over Kyle's bed. Derek Hoffman, Linda's supposed business partner from her marketing firm. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for his phone to call 911. But then Derek spoke, his voice clearly audible through the camera's sensitive microphone. "Wake up, kid. Time for your medicine." Kyle stirred, and even through the infrared feed, Daniel could see the terror that immediately flooded his son's face when he saw Derek looming over him. "Please," Kyle whispered. "I told you I wouldn't say anything. Please just leave me alone." Linda moved into frame, and Daniel felt his world shatter as she placed a gentle hand on Kyle's forehead, the same gesture she'd used to comfort their son through childhood fevers and nightmares. "Shoot, baby," she murmured. "You know this is for the best. Derek and I are going to be together, and you're going to help us make that happen. Your father has so much money, and he'd do anything to protect you." "Mom, please," Kyle sobbed. "I'm your son, and you're going to be a very useful son," Derek said, pulling something from his jacket. "Hold still." What happened next would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. He watched, paralyzed by shock and rage, as the woman he'd loved for 19 years and trusted with his life helped a stranger inject their son with something that made Kyle go limp and compliant. "There we go," Derek said, checking Kyle's pulse. "Just enough to keep him manageable. Now, about those bruises healing too fast." Daniel's military training finally overrode his emotional shock as Derek pulled out what looked like a small baton. This wasn't just abuse. This was systematic torture designed to keep Kyle terrified and dependent. And Linda, was not just allowing it, but orchestrating it. He was already moving, grabbing his service weapon from the safe, when Derek struck Kyle across the ribs. Kyle's muffled cry of pain cut through Daniel like a blade, and something fundamental broke inside him. The man who'd spent decades fighting monsters overseas realized the worst monster had been living in his own home. Daniel's tactical training took over as he moved through his house like a ghost. Years of close-quarters combat had taught him to be silent, invisible, lethal. He positioned himself outside Kyle's room, weapon drawn, as Linda and Derek continued their assault on his son. "The beauty of this," Derek was saying, "is that your dad will never suspect your own mother. We'll bleed him dry through sympathy, and by the time he figures it out, we'll be in the Cayman Islands, and you'll be what?" Daniel's voice cut through the darkness like a sword. The room froze. Linda spun around, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something that might have been relief. Derek, however, was reaching for something in his waistband. "I wouldn't," Daniel said, his weapon trained center mass on Derek. "Unless you want to explain to the police why your brains are decorating my son's wall." "Danny," Linda started, her voice taking on that same manipulative sweetness she'd used on Kyle. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Daniel's voice carried the kind of cold fury that had made enemy commanders surrender entire compounds. "Because it looks like my wife and her lover have been systematically torturing my son to extort money from me. Did I miss something?" Derek's hand moved another inch toward his weapon. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Daniel's military reflexes kicked in, and Derek was on the ground with a dislocated shoulder before he could blink. The gun Derek had been reaching for skittered across the floor as he screamed in pain. "Dad!" Kyle's voice was slurred from whatever they'd injected him with, but the relief was unmistakable. "It's okay, son. Daddy's here." Daniel kept his weapon trained on Linda, who was backing toward the window. "Linda, don't even think about running. You haven't begun to pay for what you've done. You can't prove anything," she hissed, and Daniel saw her clearly for the first time in months, maybe years. The mask was completely off now, revealing something calculating and cruel beneath the perfect facade. "I don't need to prove anything in court," Daniel said quietly. "I have 18 hours of footage of you and your boyfriend torturing my son. That's all the proof I need." Linda's face went white as she realized what he meant. "Danny, please. We can work this out. I'll leave Derek. We can get counseling." "Oh, we're way past counseling." Daniel's smile was the kind that had made hardened terrorists reconsider their life choices. "Way past. In fact, we're about to enter territory you can't even imagine." He pulled out his phone with his free hand and dialed 911. "Police and ambulance to 1247 Maple Drive. I've caught 2 intruders assaulting my son." "Danny, no." Linda lunged toward him, but Daniel was ready. A gentle push sent her sprawling next to Derek, who was still writhing in pain. 911. What's your emergency?" "This is Daniel Morrison. I need police and paramedics. 2 home invaders have been systematically abusing my son. I have them restrained, but the boy needs medical attention." Linda stared at him in horror as she realized what he was doing. To the outside world, she and Derek would be strangers who'd broken into the Morrison home. The security cameras would show them entering illegally. Kyle's injuries would corroborate the story, and Daniel's reputation as a decorated veteran and respected businessman would make his version unquestionable. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can do whatever I want," Daniel replied, his voice carrying the promise of something far worse than prison. "I'm a decorated war hero who caught strangers torturing his son. Do you really think anyone's going to question my story?" As sirens wailed in the distance, Daniel knelt beside Kyle, gently checking his pulse and pupils. The drug was wearing off, and Kyle was becoming more alert. "Dad!" Kyle's voice was getting stronger. "Are you going to be okay?" Daniel's heart nearly broke at the question. Even drugged and beaten, his son was worried about him. "I'm going to be fine, son. But Linda and Derek." Daniel looked at the two people who'd betrayed his family, his eyes promising retribution that would make their worst nightmares seem pleasant. They're going to wish they'd never been born. The war had come home, and Daniel Morrison was done being the victim. Chapter 4. The Anatomy of a Hunter. 3 weeks after the arrests, Daniel Morrison sat in his private office reviewing files that would have impressed his old commanding officers with their thoroughness. The public story was clean. Linda Morrison and Derek Hoffman, co-conspirators in an elaborate scheme to torture Kyle Morrison for ransom money, had been arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The media had painted Daniel as a heroic father, and Kyle was recovering well in trauma counseling. But the real story was just beginning. Daniel had spent those 3 weeks doing what he did best, gathering intelligence and building a strategy. The folder in front of him contained the complete life histories of Linda Morrison and Derek Hoffman, compiled with the help of Trevor Walsh and their extensive network of former military contractors who now worked in the shadows of the private sector. Linda Elizabeth Morrison, née Patterson, age 41, born in Portland to middle-class parents who declared bankruptcy when she was 16. First arrest at 17 for credit card fraud. Charges dropped due to lack of evidence. Married Daniel when she was 22 and he was 26, right before his third deployment to Afghanistan. What Daniel found most interesting were the gaps in her employment history and the financial records Trevor had obtained through less than legal means. For the past 2 years, Linda had been siphoning money from their joint accounts, small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but totaling nearly $80,000. Derek Hoffman's file was even more revealing. 38 years old, divorced twice, both ex-wives had filed restraining orders citing escalating emotional and physical abuse. He'd met Linda at a business conference 18 months ago, around the same time her personality had begun to change. But the most damning information came from Derek's financial records. He owed nearly $300,000 to some very unpleasant people, the kind who collected debts with baseball bats and didn't accept payment plans. The kind Daniel had dealt with in darker corners of the world. Trevor Walsh knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 15 years of partnership and shared combat experience. At 42, Trevor maintained the lean build and alert eyes of his Special Forces days, though his expertise now lay in corporate espionage and problem resolution. The lawyers called, Trevor said, settling into the chair across from Daniel's desk. Linda's attorney is pushing for a plea deal. Voluntary manslaughter on the torture charges, 20 years with parole possibility in 12. Daniel didn't look up from the files. Absolutely not. Dan, 20 years is not enough. Daniel's voice carried the flat finality of a man stating natural law. 20 years means she gets out while Kyle's still young enough to be manipulated. 20 years means that she might convince some bleeding heart parole board that she's reformed. 20 years means she lives to potentially hurt him again. Trevor had seen Daniel in this mode before, during the Kandahar incident when a local commander had betrayed their position, resulting in the deaths of 3 Marines. That commander had been found weeks later, dead from what appeared to be internal hemorrhaging, though no cause was ever determined. What about Derek? Trevor asked carefully. Derek owes money to the Kozlov organization, Daniel said, finally looking up. $300,000 plus interest. I've already made contact with their collection specialist. Trevor felt a chill. The Kozlov family ran most of the underground financing on the West Coast, and their collection methods were legendary for creativity and permanence. Dan, you can't. I can't what? Daniel's eyes were the cold gray of winter steel. I can't arrange for a known extortionist to face the consequences of his other poor choices. Derek borrowed money from very bad people. If those very bad people happen to learn where he's being held pending trial, well, that's just unfortunate timing. Daniel stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Kyle hasn't slept through the night since this started. He flinches when I touch him. My 17-year-old son, who used to tell me everything, now checks corners for threats and jumps at sudden noises. They broke something in him, Trevor. The therapist said he'll recover. But recovery and justice aren't the same thing. Daniel turned back to his partner. I need you to understand something. The Daniel Morrison who married Linda and raised Kyle, that man was willing to forgive, to seek help, to believe in second chances. That man died the night I watched my wife inject my son with drugs so her boyfriend could beat him. Trevor had seen Daniel kill people with his bare hands, had watched him plan operations that resulted in the elimination of entire terrorist cells. But the man standing before him now was something different, something colder and more dangerous than the soldier he'd known. What are you going to do? Daniel returned to his desk and opened another file, this one thicker than the others. Linda and Derek thought they were manipulating a suburban father and businessman. They didn't realize they were targeting someone who spent 23 years in the darkest corners of the world, learning how to hunt monsters. The file contained floor plans, guard schedules, inmate rosters, and detailed psychological profiles. Daniel had been busy during Kyle's recovery. I'm going to give them what they deserve, Daniel continued. Derek will face his creditors. All I have to do is ensure the right information reaches the right people. His death will be slow and educational. And Linda? Daniel's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. Linda is going to learn that some betrayals carry a lifetime warranty. She wanted my money so badly, she's going to get all of it. Every penny she's legally entitled to as my wife. Trevor didn't understand. That doesn't sound like revenge. Patience, Daniel said, pulling out a final document. Linda's about to inherit a very expensive problem. You see, I've been conducting some business transactions over the past few weeks. Leveraging assets, making investments, restructuring debt. Trevor scanned the document and felt his blood run cold. Jesus Christ, Dan. You transferred everything. Every asset, every account, every investment. As of this morning, Linda Morrison is the sole owner of Morrison Security Consulting and all associated holdings. Daniel's expression was perfectly calm. She's also the sole inheritor of our debt obligations. What debt obligations? Daniel's smile widened. Well, it seems I've developed quite a gambling problem over the past few months. Terrible addiction, really. Lost everything to some very unsavory characters. The kind who don't distinguish between husbands and wives when it comes to collection. Trevor stared at the papers in horror. Daniel had systematically destroyed his own financial empire and transferred the wreckage to Linda. She would inherit not wealth, but a death sentence from the same people Derek owed money to. The beauty of it, Daniel continued, is that it's all completely legal. Spousal property laws are very clear about shared debt responsibility. Even if she's in prison, they'll find her. Dan, this is justice. Daniel's voice cut through Trevor's objections like a blade. They torture my son for money. Now they'll both die for it. Derek quickly, Linda slowly, over many years of looking over her shoulder, wondering when her creditors will come calling. Trevor had followed Daniel into some of the darkest operations imaginable, but this level of methodical destruction was beyond anything he'd witnessed. What about Kyle? What about your life? Daniel picked up a framed photo of Kyle from his desk, taken last year's baseball game, when the boy's biggest worry was maintaining his batting average. My old life ended the night. I watched my wife help a stranger torture my son. This new life has only one purpose, making sure that everyone who hurt Kyle pays the full price. Daniel's eyes met Trevor's. The question is whether you're with me or not. Trevor looked at his oldest friend, recognizing the man who'd walked into enemy compounds alone and emerged victorious. Daniel Morrison was no longer playing by civilian rules, and God help anyone who stood in his way. What do you need me to do? Chapter 5, Setting the Board. The Oregon State Penitentiary's visiting room hummed with the low murmur of conversations between inmates and their families. Daniel Morrison sat across from Derek Hoffman, separated by reinforced glass, and connected by a phone that recorded every word. Derek looked terrible. 3 weeks in Gen Pop had left him thinner, jumpier, and sporting a collection of bruises that spoke to his unpopularity among his fellow inmates. You came, Derek said, his voice crackling through the phone. I wasn't sure you would. Daniel's expression was perfectly neutral, the face he'd worn during prisoner interrogations in hostile territory. I wanted to see how you were adjusting to your new accommodations. Derek's laugh was bitter. Your boy Kyle really did a number on me, didn't he? Telling everyone I was some kind of child molester. Half the guys in here want to kill me, and the other half want to make me their girlfriend. Kyle told the truth about what you did to him. Look, Morrison, I never touched your kid like that. Yeah, Linda and I roughed him up a little, but it wasn't sexual. We just needed him scared so you'd pay up. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying Derek with the same intensity he'd once used to evaluate enemy combatants. You're right. It wasn't sexual. It was financial. You tortured my son for money. You needed to pay off Alexei Kozlov. Daniel's words hit Derek like a physical blow. $300,000 plus interest. Currently sitting at around $450, I'd estimate. Derek's face went white. How would you know about that? I know a lot of things, Derek. For instance, I know that Alexei is very interested in your current location. Apparently, he's been looking for you. The phone slipped from Derek's nerveless fingers, and Daniel watched with satisfaction as panic flooded his prisoner's eyes. Derek recovered the handset, his voice now a desperate whisper. You didn't tell him where I am. Please tell me you didn't. I didn't have to. Daniel's smile was cold as Arctic wind. Alexei has contacts everywhere, including inside this facility. Prison guards don't make much money, Derek. They're surprisingly open to supplemental income. Derek looked around the visiting room frantically, as if expecting Russian enforcers to materialize from the walls. Morrison, please. I know I hurt your son, but you can't do this. Alexei will. Alexei will do what he does to people who owe him money and disappear. Nothing I can control or prevent. Daniel leaned forward. But I might be able to help you. Ow! There's a witness protection program for federal informants. If you were to provide information about a certain conspiracy to commit extortion and child abuse, if you were to implicate certain co-conspirators and provide evidence of their planning and participation. Daniel let the implication hang in the air. Derek's desperation was almost palpable. You want me to testify against Linda? I want you to tell the truth about whose idea this was. I want you to explain how she recruited you, how she provided inside information about our family, how she helped plan Kyle's abuse. Daniel's voice remained perfectly calm. I want the prosecutor to understand that Linda Morrison was the architect of this conspiracy. She was, Derek said quickly. It was all her idea. She came to me, said her husband was loaded and stupid, said we could scare the kid into getting money. She knew his schedule, knew when you'd be home, knew everything. And in exchange for your complete cooperation, I'll make sure certain information doesn't reach certain people. Derek grabbed the phone with both hands. Yes. God, yes. Whatever you want, I'll say. Just keep Kozlov away from me. Daniel stood, preparing to leave. Oh, Derek, one more thing. If you ever change your mind about cooperating, if you ever think about recanting your testimony or claiming you were coerced. Daniel's smile disappeared entirely. Well, Alexei Kozlov will be the least of your problems. Derek was still promising cooperation when Daniel walked away. 45 minutes later, Daniel sat in a different visiting room, facing his wife of 19 years. Linda looked better than Derek. The women's facility was cleaner, safer, and her attorney had arranged for her to be housed in protective custody. She'd even managed to maintain some of her appearance, though the orange jumpsuit did nothing for her complexion. Danny, she said as soon as she picked up the phone. Thank God you're here. My lawyer says Derek is going to testify against me. Say this was all my idea. You have to help me. Daniel studied the woman he'd once loved enough to marry, the mother of his son, the person he'd trusted with his life and future. Why would I help you? Linda's perfectly rehearsed facade cracked slightly. Because I'm your wife. Because we have history. Because... She leaned forward, deploying the same manipulative charm she'd used on Kyle. Because you love me. I did love you, Daniel agreed. Past tense. The woman I loved died the night I watched her inject my son with drugs. Danny, please. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Derek threatened me, said he'd hurt Kyle if I didn't cooperate. I was protecting our son. The lie was so audacious, so completely contrary to the evidence, that Daniel almost admired her commitment to the performance. Linda, I have 18 hours of video showing you actively participating in Kyle's torture. There's no coercion defense that will work here. Linda's mask slipped further, revealing glimpses of the calculating woman underneath. Fine. Yes, I helped. But you drove me to it, Danny. 20 years of being married to a ghost. 20 years of playing second fiddle to your precious military career and your business. I deserved better. You deserved better. Daniel repeated the words thoughtfully. So you decided to torture our son for money. I decided to take what should have been mine anyway. You make millions from that security company, and what do I get? An allowance? Permission to buy groceries. Daniel pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. You're absolutely right. You deserve everything that's coming to you. Linda opened the folder, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she read the documents inside. Congratulations, Daniel said. As of this morning, you are the sole owner of Morrison Security Consulting. Every asset, every account, every investment. It's all yours now. This is everything. Your entire company. Our entire company, Daniel corrected. Community property laws are very clear. What's mine is yours, especially the debts. Linda's face went white as she reached the final pages. What debts? Well, it seems I developed quite a gambling problem over the past few months. Poker, sports betting, some very high-stakes underground games. Lost everything to some fairly unpleasant people. Linda stared at the numbers, her hand trembling. This says you owe $12 million. We owe $12 million. Community property, remember? And our creditors are very eager to collect. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'm told the Kozlov organization is particularly creative in their collection methods. You can't do this. This is fraud. This is completely legal. I have witnesses' documentation, even some very convincing therapy records about my gambling addiction and subsequent financial ruin. Daniel's smile was cold as winter. My attorney assures me it will all hold up in court. Linda was hyperventilating now, the full scope of her situation becoming clear. They'll kill me. Probably. Though I'm told Alexei Kozlov prefers to make examples of people who owe him money. The deaths tend to be educational. Danny, please. I'm sorry. I'll make this right. You're going to make this right by accepting responsibility for your choices. Derek is going to testify that this conspiracy was your idea, that you recruited him, that you provided the inside information. In exchange, he gets witness protection. And what do I get? Daniel stood to leave. You get exactly what you wanted, Linda. All of my money. His smile was the last thing she saw before he hung up the phone. Every bloody penny of it. As Daniel walked out of the prison, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced in combat. Linda and Derek had thought they were playing against a suburban businessman. They'd never realized they were facing someone who'd spent decades learning how to destroy his enemies completely and permanently. The war was almost over, and Daniel Morrison always won his wars. Chapter 6, The Price of Betrayal. Kyle Morrison stood at his bedroom window, watching his father tend to the garden below. 3 months had passed since the arrests, and while Kyle's physical injuries had healed, the deeper wounds were taking longer to close. Dr. Patricia Wells, his trauma counselor, said healing wasn't linear. Some days were better than others. Today was a better day. Kyle. Daniel's voice came from downstairs. Your Uncle Trevor's here. Kyle hurried downstairs, genuinely excited to see Trevor Walsh. Unlike the parade of attorneys, social workers, and therapists who'd invaded their home recently, Trevor felt normal, a reminder of the life they'd had before everything fell apart. Hey, kid, Trevor said, pulling Kyle into a careful hug. Trevor had been the one to explain to Kyle that men who'd been through trauma sometimes needed extra space, and Kyle appreciated that Trevor remembered. How are you holding up? Trevor asked as they settled in the living room. Better, Kyle said honestly. The nightmares are getting less frequent. And Dad's been amazing. Trevor glanced at Daniel, noting the changes in his old friend. Daniel looked healthier than he had in months. The constant tension that had marked his features during the marriage was gone, replaced by the focused calm of a man with a clear mission. Your father called me over to discuss some business matters, Trevor said. But first, I wanted to talk to you about something. Kyle tensed slightly. What kind of something? College, Daniel said, settling into his chair. Your acceptance to Stanford still stands, but given everything that's happened, we wanted to make sure that's still what you want. Kyle blinked in surprise. With everything else going on, he'd almost forgotten about college applications. Yes. I still want to go. I think maybe you need to get away from here for a while. That's what we thought, Trevor said, which is why your dad and I have been making some arrangements. Daniel pulled out a folder, thinner than the ones Kyle had seen him carrying lately, but somehow more significant. Trevor's son Marcus is a sophomore at Stanford. He's agreed to be your roommate and, well, let's call him your unofficial security. Security? Marcus isn't just Trevor's son, Daniel explained. He's also trained in personal protection, military family tradition. Think of him as a very well-educated bodyguard who happens to be studying computer science. Kyle felt a flutter of anxiety. Do I need a bodyguard? I thought Linda and Derek were in prison. Trevor and Daniel exchanged a look that Kyle had learned to recognize. The look adults shared when they were deciding how much truth a teenager could handle. Kyle, Daniel said carefully, there are some complications with Linda and Derek's cases. We want to make sure you're protected while those complications get sorted out. What kind of complications? Another look between the adults. Trevor cleared his throat. Derek is cooperating with prosecutors, providing information about the conspiracy. His testimony is going to put Linda away for a very long time. That's good, right? Yes and no, Daniel said. Derek's cooperation has revealed some things about Linda that we didn't know before. She was involved with some very dangerous people, Kyle. People who might see you as a loose end. Kyle felt the familiar tightness in his chest that Dr. Wells said was anxiety manifesting as physical symptoms. So, I can't have a normal life? I can't just go to college and be a regular kid? Daniel was beside Kyle in an instant, his hand gentle on his son's shoulder. You can have whatever life you want, son, but we're going to make sure it's a safe life. Marcus is a good kid, Trevor added. You'll like him. And Stanford has excellent security. Between Marcus and the campus police, you'll be safer there than anywhere else. Kyle nodded, though part of him wondered if he'd ever feel truly safe again. When do I leave? 2 weeks, Daniel said. That should give us time to finalize some business matters here. Kyle didn't miss the euphemism. His father had been finalizing business matters for months now, and Kyle had learned not to ask too many questions about what that meant. Dad, Kyle's voice was quiet. Are you going to be okay? After I leave for college. Daniel's expression softened. I'm going to be fine, Kyle. Better than fine. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I need to do. After Trevor left, Kyle found his father in the home office, surrounded by files and legal documents. Daniel looked up as Kyle knocked on the doorframe. Come in, son. Kyle settled in the chair across from Daniel's desk, the same chair where he'd done homework for years while his father worked on boring business stuff. Now, Kyle understood that his father's work was far from boring. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. What's really going to happen to Linda and Derek? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying his son's face. Kyle had grown up a lot in the past few months. The boy who'd once worried about baseball games and algebra tests was now asking adult questions about justice and consequences. What do you want to happen to them? Daniel asked. Kyle thought carefully before answering. I want them to never be able to hurt anyone else. I want Derek to understand what it feels like to be scared and helpless. And Linda. Kyle's voice hardened in a way that reminded Daniel powerfully of himself. Linda was supposed to protect me. She was my mother, and she chose to hurt me instead. I want her to understand what that betrayal feels like. Daniel felt a surge of pride and concern in equal measure. Kyle was his son in every way that mattered, including the capacity for righteous anger and strategic thinking. They will, Daniel said simply. They're going to understand exactly what they put you through. Are you going to get in trouble for whatever you're planning? Daniel smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Kyle had seen on his father's face in months. No, son, I'm not going to get in trouble. What I'm doing is perfectly legal, carefully planned, and completely justified. Good, Kyle said, standing to leave. Because I need you to be okay. I can't lose you too. The simple statement hit Daniel harder than any physical blow. Kyle had lost his mother, not to death, but to something worse. Betrayal. Linda Morrison was still alive, but the woman Kyle had called Mom was gone forever, revealed to be a monster wearing a familiar face. "You won't lose me," Daniel promised. "I'll always be here for you, Kyle, no matter what." As Kyle headed upstairs to pack for college, Daniel returned his files. The end game was approaching, and soon Linda and Derek would understand the full price of their betrayal. In 2 weeks, Kyle would be safe at Stanford under Marcus Walsh's protection. Derek would face his creditors in prison, where Daniel's information network had ensured that Alexei Kozlov's people knew exactly which cell block he called home. And Linda? Linda would discover that community property laws worked both ways. She'd wanted Daniel's money, and she was going to get all of it, along with every debt, every obligation, and every enemy that came with it. Daniel Morrison had spent his military career learning that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or reformed. They could only be destroyed completely and permanently. Soon, his family would be safe. Kyle would be starting his new life, and the people who'd hurt his son would face justice of a kind that no court could deliver. The war was almost over, and Daniel Morrison always finished what he started. Chapter 7. Justice Delivered. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. Derek Hoffman's screams echoed through cell block D of the Oregon State Penitentiary, where Alexei Kozlov's collection specialist had finally come calling. The man who'd tortured Kyle Morrison for money learned what real torture felt like when administered by a professional who'd honed his craft in the darker corners of the world. Daniel Morrison received the news over breakfast, delivered via an encrypted message from a contact he'd cultivated during his military days. The message was brief, package delivered. Client satisfied with product quality. "Good news," Kyle asked, looking up from his scrambled eggs. "Derek Hoffman won't be testifying after all," Daniel said, setting down his phone. Apparently, he had an accident in prison. Kyle's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of accident?" "The kind that happens when you owe money to very bad people." Daniel's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I'm told it was quite educational for the other inmates." Kyle nodded and returned to his breakfast. Dr. Wells would probably say it was unhealthy for a 17-year-old to feel satisfaction at another person's death, but Kyle had stopped caring about psychological norms months ago. Derek Hoffman had helped torture him for money. Derek Hoffman was dead. The universe felt more balanced. "What about Linda?" Kyle asked. "Linda's situation is more complex. But don't worry, justice is coming for her too." 3 days later, Kyle left for Stanford with a full scholarship, a new identity courtesy of his father's connections, and the protection of Marcus Walsh, Trevor's son who happened to be built like a linebacker and trained in close protection techniques. With Kyle safely away, Daniel Morrison was free to complete his work. Linda Morrison's legal troubles had multiplied exponentially since Derek's death. Without his testimony, the prosecution's case for conspiracy had weakened, but other evidence had emerged. Evidence that painted Linda as the mastermind of an elaborate extortion scheme targeting her own family. What Linda didn't know was that every piece of damning evidence had been carefully crafted and planted by Daniel, using skills he'd learned during Black Ops missions where the truth was whatever served the mission best. Financial records showed Linda had been planning the scheme for over a year. Communication intercepts revealed her discussing Kyle's vulnerabilities with unknown conspirators. Psychological evaluations suggested a pattern of narcissistic behavior and exploitation. The case was airtight, and Linda Morrison was looking at life in prison without parole. But Daniel wasn't finished. On a cold morning in November, 2 men in expensive suits visited Linda in her jail cell. They introduced themselves as representatives of Alexei Kozlov's financial organization and explained that her husband's gambling debts were now her responsibility under Oregon's community property laws. Mrs. Morrison, the taller one, said, his accent marking him as Eastern European, "Your husband owes our organization $12 million, plus interest. As his wife, you are equally liable for this debt." Linda's attorney had prepared her for this possibility, but the reality was still devastating. "I don't have $12 million. We understand. This is why we offer payment plans. The contract they presented was written in legal language that obscured its true meaning, but the essence was simple. Linda Morrison would work off her debt to the Kozlov organization. The work would be dangerous, illegal, and likely to result in her death within 2 years. Of course, the shorter man added, if you prefer, we can arrange for immediate payment of the full amount. We have associates in this facility who would be happy to assist with collection. Linda signed a contract with shaking hands. What Linda didn't know was that the two men weren't actually from the Kozlov organization. They were former intelligence operatives whom Daniel had hired to play a role. The contract wasn't legally binding, and the debt wasn't real. But the psychological torture was very real indeed. For 3 months, Linda lived in constant fear, expecting each day to bring either a work assignment that would kill her or a visit from enforcers who would collect the debt through violence. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and began showing signs of severe psychological breakdown. Her attorney filed motion after motion for better protection, for transfer to federal custody, for anything that might save his client from the mysterious creditors who seemed to have unlimited reach into the prison system. It was during this period of maximum psychological pressure that Daniel played his final card. He visited Linda on a gray February morning, 6 months after Derek's death and 3 months after Kyle had started his new life at Stanford. Linda looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, and jumping at every shadow. "Hello, Linda." Linda picked up the prison phone with trembling hands. "Danny, thank God. You have to help me. These people, Kozlov's people, they're going to kill me. They say you owe them money, but I know you would never." "I never gambled a penny," Daniel said quietly. Linda's words died in her throat. "What? I never gambled. Never owed money to Alexei Kozlov. Never had any debt at all." Daniel's voice was perfectly calm. "I made all up." Linda stared at him through the reinforced glass, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The gambling records, the debt documents, the financial transactions, all fiction. Very convincing fiction, created by people who specialize in making lies look like truth. But the men who came to see me, actors. Very good ones, but actors nonetheless. Former CIA operatives who know how to play a role convincingly. Linda's face cycled through confusion, hope, and finally dawning horror as she understood what Daniel was telling her. "You orchestrated all of this. Every detail. Derek's death was real. I simply made sure the right information reached the right people. But your debt to the Kozlov organization, your impending execution, the mysterious enforcers who've been terrorizing you for months." Daniel smiled coldly. "All theater, Linda. All designed to give you a taste of the fear and helplessness you inflicted on our son." Linda was hyperventilating now. "You can't do this. This is psychological torture. This is justice." Daniel's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "You tortured Kyle for money. I tortured you for justice. The only difference is that Kyle was innocent, and you deserve everything you've gotten. I'm still going to prison for life. Isn't that enough?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes showing not even a trace of mercy. "Linda, you injected my son with drugs so another man could beat him. You looked him in the eyes while he begged for mercy and chose to hurt him anyway. You betrayed the most fundamental trust a child can have in a parent. I'm sorry. God, Danny, I'm so sorry." "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did to Kyle." Daniel stood to leave. "Prison is too good for you, Linda. But it'll have to do." "Wait." Linda pressed her hand against the glass. "What about the debt? What about Kozlov's people?" Daniel turned back with a smile that made Linda's blood freeze. "Oh, that's the beautiful part. While you've been worrying about fictional debt collectors, I've been making some real arrangements. You see, your reputation in here has taken quite a beating. Word has spread that you're a child abuser, someone who tortured her own son for money." Linda's face went white. In prison hierarchies, child abusers ranked somewhere below informants and slightly above mass murderers of children. "I'm told the other inmates have been very interested in meeting you once you're transferred to general population. Apparently, several of them are mothers who don't appreciate what you did to Kyle. They'll kill me. Probably. Though I hear prison justice can be quite creative." Daniel's smile was the last thing Linda saw before he hung up the phone and walked away. As Daniel left the prison, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced in his military career. Linda Morrison would spend the rest of her life, however long that might be, understanding exactly what it felt like to be helpless, terrified, and betrayed by people who were supposed to protect her. The war was over. Daniel Morrison had won completely and permanently. Kyle was safe, starting a new life under a new identity with the best protection Daniel could provide. Derek was dead, having learned the price of hurting Daniel's family. And Linda would face justice every day for the rest of her life. Some enemies could be forgiven. Some mistakes could be overlooked. But not this. Never this. Daniel Morrison drove home to a house that was finally free of monsters, finally safe for the family he had left. He'd lost a wife and gained a clear conscience. It was the best trade he'd ever made. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Kyle Morrison's voice crackled through the encrypted satellite phone as Daniel walked through his empty house. It was midnight on the West Coast, but Kyle's voice was bright with excitement. "Dad, you should see this place. Marcus and I just finished our midterms, and I think I aced advanced calculus." Professor Johnson said my proof methodology was graduate-level work. Daniel smiled as he settled into his home office chair. "That's my boy. Your mother always said you got your analytical mind from me." There was a brief pause. Kyle still struggled with references to Linda, even positive ones. "Yeah, well, I got the good parts from you and left the bad parts behind. How are you sleeping?" "Better. The nightmares are mostly gone now. Dr. Martinez, she's the counselor here, says that physical distance from trauma sites can accelerate psychological healing." Kyle's voice grew more serious. "How are you doing, Dad?" "Really?" Daniel looked around his office, which had been transformed into a command center over the past 8 months. Maps, photographs, legal documents, and surveillance reports covered every surface. The wall-mounted monitors displayed real-time feeds from Linda's prison, financial tracking data, and communication intercept from associates of various criminal organizations. "I'm doing well, son. Very well. Have you heard anything about the trial?" Daniel's trial for Linda had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The evidence against her had been overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony, and psychological evaluations all painting her as a calculating sociopath who'd tortured her own child for money. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. "She was sentenced last week," Daniel said. "Life without parole. She'll never hurt anyone again." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "Good. I know Dr. Martinez says I should feel conflicted about wishing bad things on my biological mother, but I don't. I'm glad she's going to pay for what she did. She's not your mother, Kyle. A mother protects her children. Linda was just a woman who gave birth to you." Daniel's voice carried the flat certainty of a man stating natural law. "Family is about love and loyalty and protection. Biology is just an accident. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than anything in this world." After Kyle hung up, Daniel turned his attention to the monitors displaying Linda's current situation. She'd been transferred to general population 3 days ago, and the results had been educational. Linda Morrison, formerly the sophisticated marketing executive who'd thrown charity galas and managed million-dollar campaigns, was now inmate number 47381 at Oregon Women's Correctional Center. Her cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, containing a metal cot, a toilet, and a small shelf for personal belongings. She had no personal belongings. The other inmates had made their feelings about child abusers very clear. Linda's commissary money disappeared within hours of being deposited. Her meals were accidentally knocked to the floor. Her cell was randomly searched and vandalized daily by guards who'd heard about her crimes. But the real punishment was psychological. Daniel had spent months carefully crafting Linda's reputation within the prison system. Through a network of former military contractors who now worked in private security, he'd ensured that every guard, every administrator, and every influential inmate knew exactly what Linda Morrison had done to her son. The story had grown in the telling, as prison stories do. By the time Linda arrived at OWCC, she was known as the monster who'd sold her own child to sexual predators for drug money. The truth was bad enough, but the enhanced version guaranteed that Linda would never know a moment's peace. Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his contact inside the prison. Subject experiencing severe psychological distress. Panic attacks increasing. Medical isolation requested, but denied due to overcrowding. Daniel typed back, understood. Continue monitoring. The beautiful irony was that everything happening to Linda was completely legal and entirely natural. Daniel hadn't bribed guards or hired inmates to assault her. He'd simply ensured that the truth about her crimes was widely known, and the prison ecosystem had responded predictably. Child abusers didn't fare well in women's prisons, especially when their victims were their own children. The other inmates, many of whom were mothers separated from their own kids, viewed Linda as the worst kind of monster. And they expressed their disapproval through 1,000 small cruelties that would break her mind long before they touched her body. Trevor Walsh knocked on Daniel's office door and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that had carried over from their military days. He looked around the command center with the expression of a man who'd seen his share of classified operations, but was still impressed by the scope of Daniel's surveillance network. Impressive setup, Trevor said, settling into the chair across from Daniel's desk. Though I have to ask, when does this end? Daniel looked at his oldest friend and partner. When Linda Morrison dies. Naturally, of course. I'm not going to have her killed. That would be too quick, too merciful. But when she finally succumbs to the stress, the fear, the complete hopelessness of her situation, then it ends. And Derek ended months ago. Daniel's smile was cold as winter steel. I'm told his death was quite instructive for the other inmates. Amazing how quickly word spreads about the consequences of hurting children. Trevor studied the monitors showing various angles of Linda's prison activities. She was currently in her cell, sitting on her bunk and staring at the wall with the vacant expression of someone whose mind was beginning to fracture. Dan, you've destroyed them both completely. Your son is safe, your enemies are suffering, and you've emerged from this stronger than ever. Maybe it's time to think about moving forward. Daniel turned to face Trevor directly. Kyle is safe for now, but Linda has friends, associates, people who might someday think they can use my son to get leverage over me. Derek had criminal contacts who might view Kyle as an asset or a threat. The network that enabled their crimes against my family is still out there. So what are you planning? Daniel pulled out a thick folder, the culmination of 8 months of investigation and planning. I'm planning to end this permanently. Every person who knew about Linda and Derek's scheme and did nothing. Every criminal contact who might someday threaten Kyle. Every loose thread that could unravel into future danger. Trevor opened the folder and felt his blood run cold. The target list contained 47 names, complete with addresses, financial records, family information, and detailed vulnerability assessments. Former associates of Derek's from his criminal activities. Business contacts of Linda's who'd suspected something was wrong, but chose to look the other way. Extended family members who'd known about Kyle's abuse, but failed to report it. Jesus Christ, Dan. This is a hit list. This is a completion list, Daniel corrected. These people enabled what happened to Kyle through action or inaction. They represent ongoing threats to my son's safety and my family's security. They need to be addressed. Trevor looked at his friend and recognized the man who'd planned operations that resulted in the elimination of entire terrorist networks. Daniel Morrison, in full tactical mode, was a force of nature, and when he decided that someone was a threat, that someone tended to stop being a problem very quickly. Ow! Daniel's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. Some will face financial ruin. Amazing how quickly criminal enterprises collapse when the right information reaches law enforcement. Some will face professional destruction. Turns out that harboring knowledge of child abuse can end careers very abruptly. Some will face personal consequences. Criminal associates have such dangerous lifestyles. And the others? The others will simply disappear from Kyle's life permanently. New identities, new locations, new circumstances that make any future contact impossible. Trevor closed the folder, understanding that he was looking at the final phase of Daniel Morrison's war against everyone who'd threatened his family. It was comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. "What do you need from me?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying his oldest friend. "I need you to understand that this isn't revenge anymore. This is threat elimination. Kyle is starting a new life, and I'm going to make sure that no ghost from his past can ever hurt him again." And after, when the list is complete, Daniel turned to look at a framed photo on his desk. Kyle in his Stanford sweatshirt, smiling genuinely for the first time since the nightmare began. "After, I'm going to be the father Kyle deserves. I'm going to watch him graduate, maybe walk him down the aisle someday, teach his children how to throw a baseball." Daniel's voice softened slightly. "I'm going to have the life Linda and Derek tried to destroy." Trevor nodded, understanding that he was witnessing the final evolution of Daniel Morrison from soldier to protector to something altogether more dangerous. A father who would burn down the world to keep his child safe. "When do we start?" Daniel smiled, and Trevor felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. They'd fought wars together, planned impossible missions, and emerged victorious from situations that should have killed them. This would be their final campaign, and like all of Daniel Morrison's wars, it would end with total victory. We start tonight. Chapter 9, The End of War. 6 months later, Daniel Morrison stood in Stanford University's main quadrangle, watching his son graduate with highest honors in mathematics and computer science. Kyle walked across the stage with confidence in his step and genuine joy on his face. The first time Daniel had seen that particular expression since before the nightmare began. Dr. Patricia Wells, Kyle's original trauma counselor, had called Kyle's recovery remarkable and a testament to resilience and strong family support. What she didn't know was that Kyle's healing had been accelerated by the knowledge that every threat to his safety had been systematically eliminated. The completion list had taken 6 months to work through, but Daniel's network of former military contractors and intelligence operatives had proven remarkably efficient. Of the 47 names on the original target list, 31 had been arrested on various charges, 8 had suffered professional or financial ruin, 5 had relocated to different countries under circumstances that made return inadvisable, and 3 had died in accidents that were tragic but unsuspicious. Derek Hoffman's criminal associates had been particularly easy to deal with. A few well-placed tips to law enforcement had resulted in the dismantling of an entire money laundering operation. Linda's business contacts who'd suspected abuse but stayed silent had found their careers ended by mysteriously leaked information about their complicity. The network was broken, scattered, and no longer capable of threatening Kyle's future. "Dad!" Kyle's voice cut through Daniel's thoughts as his son approached with his diploma and a young woman Daniel hadn't met before. "Kyle!" Daniel pulled his son into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you. Dad, I want you to meet Sarah Chun. She's my girlfriend." Sarah was petite, Asian American, with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake that spoke to confidence and strength. Daniel liked her immediately. "Mr. Morrison, Kyle's told me so much about you. Thank you for everything you've done for him." Daniel glanced at Kyle, wondering how much Sarah knew about their family's history. Kyle seemed to read his mind. "Sarah knows everything, Dad. About Linda, about Derek, about why I needed a new identity." Kyle's voice was steady. "She's studying criminology, actually. Wants to help kids who've been through what I went through." Daniel felt a surge of pride and approval. Kyle had chosen well, a partner who understood trauma and was dedicated to helping others heal from it. "Sarah, it's wonderful to meet you. Kyle's judgment has always been excellent." As they walked across campus, Kyle filled Daniel in on his plans. Graduate school at MIT, a thesis on cryptographic security systems, and a long-term goal of working with law enforcement to develop better tools for protecting children from online predators. "I want to make sure other kids don't go through what I did," Kyle explained. "And if they do, I want to help catch the people who hurt them." Daniel smiled, recognizing himself in his son's determination to protect others. "That sounds like meaningful work." "Speaking of work," Kyle said, "what are you going to do now? I mean, with me in graduate school and all your business matters resolved?" Daniel had been thinking about that question for weeks. Morrison Security Consulting continued to operate under Trevor's management, handling corporate protection and consulting contracts. But Daniel's personal mission was complete. Kyle was safe, educated, and ready to build his own life. The threats had been eliminated, and the accounts had been settled. "I'm thinking about teaching," Daniel said. "Maybe consulting work with the State Department on international security issues. Something that keeps me busy but doesn't require the kind of intensive planning I've been doing." Kyle nodded, understanding that his father was transitioning from warrior back to civilian, a process that was never simple for men like Daniel Morrison. That evening, Daniel sat in his hotel room, video calling Trevor Walsh, who was managing the business back in Oregon. "The Kozlov organization has been asking questions," Trevor reported. "Apparently, Derek's death created some complications in their collection methods. They want to know if we were involved." Daniel smiled coldly. "Tell them the truth. We provided information about Derek's location to interested parties. What those parties did with that information was their business, not ours. And if they're not satisfied with that answer, then they'll discover that Daniel Morrison isn't someone they want to have as an enemy." Daniel's voice carried the flat certainty of a man stating natural law. "But I don't think it will come to that. Alexei Kozlov is a businessman, not a fool. He got his money's worth from Derek's suffering." Trevor nodded, understanding that Daniel's reputation in certain circles would probably prevent any retribution from Derek's creditors. "What about Linda?" Daniel pulled up the prison surveillance feed on his laptop. Linda Morrison was in her cell, rocking back and forth on her bunk. 8 months of psychological pressure had reduced her to a shell of her former self. She'd stopped eating regularly, stopped communicating with other inmates, and spent most of her time staring at the wall with vacant eyes. "Linda is exactly where she belongs," Daniel said. "Living with the consequences of her choices, understanding what it feels like to be helpless and afraid, serving as an example to others who might think about hurting children for money. The prison medical staff says she's having a complete psychological breakdown." Good. Kyle had nightmares for months because of what she did to him. Now she gets to experience that same terror, but permanent and with no hope of rescue. Daniel's expression was merciless. "She'll spend whatever time she has left knowing that every sunrise brings another day of fear, just like she made Kyle feel." Trevor understood that Linda Morrison would never receive mercy from Daniel, and frankly, he didn't think she deserved any. Some crimes were unforgivable, and torturing your own child was definitely one of them. "So what's next for you, Dan?" Daniel looked out his hotel window at the Stanford campus, where his son was probably celebrating with friends who saw him as just another brilliant graduate student. Kyle had a future now, a real future, free from the shadows of his past. "Next, I'm going to watch my son build an extraordinary life. I'm going to be the father he deserves, the grandfather his children will need, and the man Linda and Derek never had the privilege of truly knowing." Daniel's voice carried deep satisfaction. "I won the war, Trevor, completely and permanently. My son is safe, my enemies are destroyed, and I can finally rest. You've earned it, brother." As Daniel ended the call, he opened a final file on his laptop, a letter he'd been writing to Kyle, meant to be opened only in the event of Daniel's death. It contained the complete truth about everything Daniel had done to protect him, every operation, every eliminated threat, every carefully orchestrated consequence that had befallen their enemies. Kyle would probably never need to read it, but if circumstances ever required him to understand the full scope of his father's love and protection, the information would be there. Daniel Morrison had spent his military career learning that some enemies could only be stopped through complete destruction. Linda Morrison and Derek Hoffman had thought they were targeting a suburban businessman and his naive family. They'd never realized they were declaring war on someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of total victory. The war was over. Daniel had won. Kyle was safe and thriving. Some fathers taught their children about forgiveness and second chances. Daniel Morrison had taught his son a different lesson. That love meant protection, that family was sacred, and that anyone who threatened those bonds would face consequences beyond their worst nightmares. It was the most important lesson Kyle would ever learn, and the greatest gift Daniel could ever give him. The monsters were dead or broken. The threats were eliminated, and Kyle Morrison was free to build whatever future he wanted. Daniel Morrison closed his laptop, poured himself a drink, and toasted his son's graduation with the satisfaction of a man who'd kept every promise that mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Architect. Vincent Riker sat in his basement workshop, meticulously crafting the miniature model of what would become Sullivan Plaza. His weathered hands moved with surgical precision as he attached the final piece to the scale model. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m., another late night, but he was accustomed to them. The basement walls were lined with architectural awards, certificates, and blueprints, evidence of 20 years devoted to his craft. Yet none of his colleagues at Sullivan Development knew the full extent of his genius. Not even Howard Sullivan, his father-in-law and boss of 15 years, appreciated the brilliance behind Vincent's designs. Still working? Naomi's voice startled him. His wife of 12 years stood at the bottom of the stairs, her silk robe loosely tied, amber hair cascading over her shoulders. Beautiful as always, even at this hour. Almost done. Vincent gestured to the model. The presentation's tomorrow. Naomi approached, studying the intricate design with practiced admiration. Howard will love it. He'd better, considering how many nights it's stolen you from me. Her fingers brushed his shoulder, a touch that once ignited passion but now felt performative. Vincent noticed, but said nothing. 15 years at Sullivan Development had taught him patience. 12 years of marriage to Howard's daughter had taught him discretion. 7 months of suspecting his wife's infidelity had taught him observation. "I'll be up soon," he promised. After Naomi returned upstairs, Vincent opened his laptop and checked the tracking software he'd installed on her phone. The location history confirmed what he already knew. 3 hours at the Wellington Hotel downtown. Room 1217, the same as last week and the week before. Vincent wasn't a violent man. His vengeance wouldn't come from his fists, but from his mind. He'd built his career creating spaces that outlived their creators. He understood that proper demolition required more planning than construction. The next morning, Vincent drove to Sullivan Development headquarters, the model secured in the back seat. The radio announced another record-breaking stock performance for the company. Howard Sullivan had built an empire, and Vincent had designed every significant structure in it. At 45, Vincent maintained the physical discipline from his military days, a past he rarely discussed. Before becoming an architect, he'd served in military intelligence, developing skills he'd kept sharp but hidden beneath his unassuming exterior. The Sullivan headquarters gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to Vincent's vision despite bearing Howard's name. As he parked, he spotted Colin Burns' Mercedes in the executive spot next to Howard's. Colin, Howard's new golden boy, 15 years Vincent's junior, with an MBA but no real-world experience or talent. Just connections, charisma, and apparently enough appeal to seduce Naomi. Vincent carried his model through the lobby, where security guards and receptionists greeted him warmly. Despite his senior position, he'd always treated support staff with respect, unlike Howard and Colin, who barely acknowledged their existence. In the elevator, he adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. Today wasn't about confrontation. It was about confirmation. Then the real work would begin. Chapter 2. Fault Lines. The boardroom fell silent as Vincent unveiled the model of Sullivan Plaza, a revolutionary design combining sustainable architecture with cutting-edge aesthetics. Howard Sullivan studied it with narrowed eyes, while Colin immediately began pointing out perceived flaws. "The eastern support structure seems unorthodox," Colin remarked with unearned authority. "Wouldn't a traditional approach save costs?" Vincent maintained his composure. "The eastern support is actually the key innovation. It reduces materials by 30% while increasing structural integrity. I've had 3 independent engineers verify the calculations. Howard waved his hand dismissively. It's too experimental. We're not in the business of architectural experiments, Vincent. We're in the business of profits. 15 years of this. Howard taking credit for successes while blaming Vincent for any complications. Vincent noticed the exchange of glances between Howard and Colin. Something felt different today, more final. After the meeting, Vincent retreated to his office, where Melissa Zhou, his loyal assistant of 8 years, waited with concern etched across her face. "They've called in HR," she whispered. "Third floor conference room in an hour." "What's happening, Vincent?" Vincent thanked her for the warning. Melissa knew more about the company's inner workings than even Howard did. Her father had been one of Howard's original investors before being mysteriously bought out for pennies on the dollar during a personal crisis. Vincent had hired her when no one else would, recognizing both her talent and her motivation to understand Sullivan development from the inside. "Would you mind backing up my personal design files?" Just as a precaution, Vincent asked. Melissa nodded, understanding the subtext. "Already did. External drive in your desk drawer. I also made copies of those other documents you asked me to track." Those other documents represented 3 years of methodical documentation. Howard's building code violations, safety shortcuts, permit manipulations, and tax maneuvers. None technically illegal when viewed individually, but damning when assembled correctly. An hour later, Vincent sat across from Howard, Colin, and a nervous HR representative named Dennis. The office overlooked the Sullivan Tower, Vincent's greatest design, though Howard had accepted all accolades. "We're letting you go." "Performance issues," Howard stated flatly, avoiding eye contact. Vincent nodded calmly. "Performance issues after 15 years?" Colin slid a severance package across the table. "The company's direction is changing. Your designs are becoming outdated." "I see." Vincent made no move to take the envelope. "And when did my wife decide that our marriage was similarly outdated?" The room temperature seemed to drop. Howard's expression hardened. "This is a professional separation, Vincent. Keep personal matters personal." Difficult considering how intertwined they've become. Vincent stood, straightening his jacket. "I'll clear my office by end of day." As Vincent departed, he heard Colin mutter something about taking it better than expected. Little did they know that Vincent had expected this day for months. The pieces were already in motion. When Vincent returned to his office, Melissa was waiting, her eyes red but determined. "They're letting me go too. Restructuring, they claim." Vincent nodded. "Perfect timing for both of us, then." "Perfect?" "Vincent, what are you planning?" "A redesign, Melissa. Something far more permanent than Sullivan Plaza." Chapter 3: Demolition Day. Vincent drove home with a model of Sullivan Plaza in his passenger seat, the only item he'd taken from his office beyond his personal designs. The security guards had watched uncomfortably as he left, many having known him for years. One had whispered, "This isn't right, Mr. Riker," as he passed. Home was a modernist structure Vincent had designed himself, one of his first projects after leaving the military. Howard had been impressed enough to hire him, then later to introduce him to Naomi. The house represented what Vincent had once believed was a foundation for his future. Now it felt like a beautifully designed lie. He entered to find Naomi packing his suitcases, her movements efficient and detached. She barely looked up when he entered their bedroom. "Howard called you," Vincent stated. "He was concerned about how you might react." Naomi continued folding his clothes. "This is better for everyone, Vincent. A clean break. 12 years of marriage ends with my clothes and luggage I don't recognize." She finally met his gaze. "Time for a fresh start." "For me," she said coldly. She handed him a brochure for a homeless shelter. "Until you find somewhere more permanent." The calculated cruelty confirmed everything. This wasn't an impulsive decision, but a coordinated elimination. Vincent took the brochure without comment. "Your severance should help until you find something else," she continued, her voice professionally sympathetic. "Though Howard mentioned your non-compete clause will make architecture difficult for a while." Did he also mention that non-compete clauses aren't enforceable in this state? Vincent watched realization flicker across her face. Or that I've maintained my military pension all these years. The one you thought I'd forfeited. Naomi faltered for the first time. What are you saying? I'm saying you and Howard might have planned this meticulously, but you built your plans on false assumptions. Vincent picked up the suitcases. Don't bother changing the locks. I won't be back. Where will you go? A trace of genuine confusion crept into her voice. To finish what I started 15 years ago. Vincent drove directly to a modest apartment building across town. The unit on the top floor had been leased under his birth name, Blake Vincent Riker, for the past 5 years. A contingency he'd established when he first suspected something wasn't right at Sullivan Development. The apartment wasn't just a backup residence. It was his war room. The walls were covered with photos, documents, and connections mapping the Sullivan Empire's vulnerabilities. Howard had built his company through manipulation and strategic betrayal of partners. Vincent had spent years quietly documenting every shortcut, every code violation, every ethical breach. Melissa was waiting for him there, having used the key he'd given her months ago when he first suspected they might both need an exit strategy. Everything's ready, she said. Operation Aftershock can commence whenever you give the word. Vincent placed the model of Sullivan Plaza on the table and opened his laptop. They think they've demolished my career and marriage in one day. They have no idea what real demolition looks like. He activated a program that executed a chain of pre-programmed electronic fund transfers, moving his considerable savings through a series of accounts before they could be frozen by Howard's banking connections. Then he made a call to a number few people knew existed. General Blackwood, it's Riker. Yes, that Riker. I'm calling in that favor. A week passed with complete silence from Vincent. No attempts to access his old accounts. No appeals to Howard for reconsideration. No desperate calls to Naomi. Just silence. Then the calls began. First a few, then dozens. Naomi's phone rang constantly with Vincent's number, but when answered, no one spoke. Howard experienced the same phenomenon. By the end of the week, they had received 93 calls between them. Frustrated and increasingly unnerved, Howard and Naomi drove to the homeless shelter from the brochure, only to discover Vincent had never arrived there. They tried his old military contacts, but no one had heard from him in years. It was Colin who finally connected the dots after a mysterious package arrived containing Vincent's dog tags and military ID. Blake Vincent Riker, Colin read aloud. Wait, Riker? As in, Howard snatched the documents. General Riker's son? That's impossible. The general's son was a classified intelligence operative who supposedly died in. Howard's face drained of color as realization dawned. What is it? Naomi demanded. We need to find him. Now. Howard's hands trembled as he dialed Vincent's number again. We may have just made the worst mistake of our lives. Chapter 4. The Ghost Architect. Tell me again why we're hiding in a bunker beneath your apartment, Melissa said, watching Vincent calibrate equipment in what appeared to be a military-grade command center. It's not a bunker, Vincent corrected. It's a secure operations facility I built 5 years ago when I realized Howard was systematically removing everyone who knew too much about his methods. The underground facility hummed with technology. Multiple screens monitoring Sullivan Development properties, financial tracking software, and surveillance feeds. One monitor displayed Naomi and Howard's increasingly frantic attempts to locate Vincent. 93 calls, Melissa marveled. That's exactly what you predicted. Howard always panics in patterns. Vincent adjusted a dial. His father was the same way during joint operations with my father's unit. Predictable under pressure. Vincent's true background remained largely classified. The son of General Alexander Riker, he'd been recruited into a specialized intelligence unit straight out of MIT. His architectural talent wasn't just artistic, it was tactical. Vincent had designed secure facilities for government agencies before a mission gone wrong forced him to adopt a modified identity. Howard Sullivan had never known he'd hired the son of his father's military rival. By the time Vincent married Naomi, he'd fully embraced his cover. Only now, with nothing left to lose, Was Vincent becoming his true self again? They received the dog tags, Melissa reported, watching another screen. Colin made the connection faster than expected. Colin Byrne is many things, but unintelligent isn't one of them, Vincent acknowledged. He's the only real threat in this scenario. A secure phone line rang. Vincent answered, activating a voice modulator. Report. Phase 1 complete, said the voice of Damon Lynch, Vincent's former teammate from his military days. Sullivan Tower's security system has been compromised. We have eyes everywhere. Vincent ended the call and turned to Melissa. Tell me about the Sullivan Foundation Gala. 2 weeks from Saturday. Every major investor, political ally, and business partner will be there. Melissa pulled up the guest list. They're announcing the Sullivan Plaza project as Howard's legacy achievement. With Colin as the new lead architect, I assume. Melissa nodded. They've already started altering your designs. The eastern support structure you innovated? They've replaced it with a conventional design that's structurally compromised if built on that particular bedrock formation, Vincent finished. I designed it that way. The true plans have a geological compensation factor that I never included in the official documentation. You sabotaged your own design. Melissa looked shocked. I created a failsafe. Howard has a history of cutting corners after final approvals. I needed leverage to ensure he built it correctly. Vincent pulled up a geological survey. The eastern side of the construction site sits on an unstable fault line that only becomes dangerous if you build using conventional support methods. So if they build it wrong, it won't collapse immediately. But the first minor earthquake or significant vibration would trigger a progressive structural failure. Vincent closed the file, which is why we're going to ensure they never break ground with those altered plans. A notification flashed on the main screen. Vincent opened a video call to see the weathered face of General Blackwood. Your father's files have been unsealed, as requested, the general said without preamble. Everything Howard Sullivan Sr. did to sabotage Alexander Riker's career and reputation. All the evidence your father could never use because of national security concerns. In the other matter, the trust fund your father established has been activated. $50 million, as specified in his will upon confirmation of your identity, plus interest. Vincent thanked him and ended the call. $50 million, Melissa whispered. My inheritance. Howard's father stole my family's reputation, and Howard stole 15 years of my career. Vincent brought up architectural renderings of a stunning new development. Now I'll use my father's money to build what Sullivan Development never could, and eliminate what they've already built. Ow! By becoming their salvation before I become their destruction. Chapter 5. The Prodigal Husband. Howard Sullivan paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what it takes. Find him. The private investigator on the other end sounded resigned. Mr. Sullivan, we've tried everything. Blake Vincent Riker effectively disappeared 12 years ago when he became Vincent Riker. Now both identities have gone dark. Howard slammed the phone down as Naomi entered, looking haggard. Nothing. Howard collapsed into his chair. Do you have any idea what this means? Vincent is Alexander Riker's son. The same Alexander Riker my father supposedly betrayed during the Kuwait operation. What does that have to do with us? Naomi demanded. So his father was some general. Not just some general. The man who invented modern structural sabotage techniques for the military. Howard's voice dropped. And Vincent has designed every major building in our portfolio for the past 15 years. The color drained from Naomi's face. You think he compromised them? I've ordered full structural assessments of everything he designed. But if he's half as skilled as his father. Howard left the implication hanging. Colin entered without knocking, tablet in hand. We have a bigger problem. Phoenix Development just announced a revolutionary new project directly competing with Sullivan Plaza. Look who's listed as chief architect. The tablet showed a rendering of a breathtaking structure signed with Vincent's distinctive mark. Below it, the corporate leadership listed Blake V. Riker, founder and CEO. He's had a competing development company this whole time. Naomi stared at the image. Worse, Collins said. 3 of our major investors called this morning. They're pulling out of Sullivan Plaza to back Phoenix instead. They say Riker showed them geological surveys indicating our site has stability issues. Howard's phone rang. Vincent's number again. This time when Howard answered, Vincent spoke. Hello, Howard. I believe we have some unfinished business. Vincent, listen. Blake Vincent Riker, he corrected. But you can call me Mr. Riker now. I'm no longer your employee or your son-in-law. Whatever you're planning, I'm planning to build, Howard. That's what architects do. I'm extending a professional courtesy by informing you that your Sullivan Plaza project is unfeasible as currently designed. The Eastern support. We know about the fault line, Howard interrupted. We can fix it. No, you can't. Not without my specific modifications, which weren't in the official plans. And I'm afraid those designs are now proprietary to Phoenix Development. Howard gripped the phone tighter. Name your price. Vincent's laugh was cold. You fired me for performance issues, Howard. My performance now commands a much higher price than you can afford. The line went dead. Colin looked grim. The geological assessment came back. He's right about the fault line. We can't build Sullivan Plaza as planned. Howard turned to Naomi. Call him. He'll talk to you. Naomi hesitated. I'm not sure that's true anymore. He was in love with you for 12 years. Use that, Howard shouted. Was he? Naomi's voice was suddenly small. I'm not sure I ever really knew him. Later that evening, Vincent sat in an exclusive restaurant across from Aaliyah Drake, the city's most prominent real estate investor. At 40, she commanded respect throughout the industry and had never worked with Sullivan Development despite Howard's persistent overtures. I've reviewed your Phoenix proposal, Aaliyah said, studying Vincent over her wine glass. Ambitious doesn't begin to describe it. You're essentially planning to redefine the city skyline. I'm planning to correct it, Vincent clarified. Sullivan Development has prioritized appearance over substance for years. My designs will prioritize both. And your sudden emergence as Blake Riker after years as Vincent, that doesn't concern potential investors. My architectural vision hasn't changed, Ms. Drake. Only my willingness to compromise it. Vincent slid an envelope across the table. These are the structural assessments for 6 Sullivan properties built in the last decade. All have critical vulnerabilities that will require significant renovation within 5 years. Aaliyah reviewed the documents with a practiced eye. If this is accurate, Sullivan Development is sitting on a time bomb. Multiple time bombs. And I'm the only one who knows how to defuse them. As they finished dinner, Vincent received a text from Melissa, Naomi requesting meeting. Says it's urgent. Vincent's response was brief. Arrange it. The penthouse. 2 days. Chapter 6. The Architect's Gambit. The penthouse of the Wellington Hotel, the very place where Naomi had conducted her affair with Colin, now served as Vincent's temporary base of operations. He had reserved the entire top floor, paying in cash through a shell company. When Naomi arrived, she found Vincent standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling below. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, looking nothing like the man she'd dismissed 2 weeks earlier. You wanted to see me, Vincent stated without turning. Naomi approached cautiously. Vincent, Blake, whatever you want to be called. Mr. Riker will suffice. She flinched at his formality. We need to talk about what's happening. What's happening is market correction. Sullivan Development has built its reputation on stolen designs and compromised structures. Phoenix Development will offer something better. This isn't about business, Naomi insisted. It's about us. About what Howard and I did. Now Vincent turned, his expression unreadable. There is no us, Naomi. You made that perfectly clear when you packed my bags and handed me a brochure for a homeless shelter. I didn't know who you really were. Precisely the problem. 12 years of marriage, and you never bothered to discover who I was beyond what I could provide for you and your father. Naomi's composure cracked. That's not fair. You hid your identity, your family. I protected information that was classified. But everything else, my principles, my passion, my loyalty, was genuine. Vincent approached her slowly. Can you say the same? I made a mistake with Colin. A terrible mistake. Your mistake wasn't Colin. Your mistake was believing I was dispensable. Vincent returned to the window. Sullivan Development, is hemorrhaging investors. Howard's political connections are distancing themselves. Colin's attempts to modify my designs have been rejected by the Planning Commission. How do you know all this? I designed your father's security system, Naomi. Did you think I wouldn't build myself a backdoor? Tears formed in Naomi's eyes. What do you want from us? From you? Nothing. From Howard? Acknowledgement. Of what? Of what his father did to mine. Of what he did to my career. Of the corners he cut that endangered thousands of people and buildings I designed. Vincent handed her a folder. This details the structural compromises in Sullivan Tower. The main support columns were built with substandard materials after I approved the final plans. Naomi paled as she reviewed the documents. If this is true, it is. And in the event of an earthquake measuring 5.0 or higher on the Richter scale, the tower would suffer catastrophic failure. My God, Howard's office is on the top floor. The board meets there weekly. Yes, they do. Vincent took back the folder. Phoenix Development has submitted a proposal to the city for comprehensive structural reinforcement of all Sullivan properties. At our expense. Naomi looked confused. You're helping us? I'm helping the innocent people who work in and live around those buildings. Vincent's expression hardened. As for Sullivan Development itself, my offer is simple, complete corporate dissolution. All assets transferred to Phoenix. Howard announces his retirement, citing health concerns. He'll never agree to that. This company is his life's work. It's my life's work. He just put his name on it. Vincent checked his watch. You have 48 hours to convince him. After that, I release the structural reports to the public, the properties get condemned, and Sullivan Development faces criminal negligence charges. Naomi started toward the door, then paused. You know, for what it's worth, I did love you once. No, Naomi, you loved the idea of me, the quiet architect who made your father rich and never questioned your absences. Vincent turned away. That man no longer exists. After she left, Melissa emerged from the adjoining room where she'd been monitoring security. Think she'll convince Howard? She asked. Howard will never surrender his company, Vincent replied. But that was never the real plan. Vincent pulled up a security feed showing Naomi making a phone call in the elevator. A voice recognition program transcribed her words in real time. He knows everything, Dad. About the buildings, about the materials. We need to move now. Right on schedule, Vincent murmured. Alert Damon. It's time for Phase 3. Chapter 7. Structural Integrity. Howard Sullivan convened an emergency board meeting at 7 a.m. the next morning. The Sullivan Tower boardroom was filled with tense executives and lawyers as he explained the situation. Vincent Riker, or Blake Riker, as he's now calling himself, is threatening to destroy this company with fabricated structural concerns, Howard declared. We need to move quickly to discredit him. Colin projected documents onto the main screen. Our engineers have conducted preliminary assessments of our properties. While they haven't found evidence of imminent danger, they admit that certain anomalies exist in the structural designs. Anomalies that only the original architect could fully explain, added Patricia Winters, the company's chief legal counsel. Mr. Sullivan, I must advise caution. If these concerns are legitimate and we dismiss them, they're not legitimate. Howard slammed his fist on the table. This is corporate sabotage by a disgruntled ex-employee. Who happens to be the son of General Alexander Riker, Colin reminded the room. A man with significant governmental connections. Howard glared at him. Whose side are you on, Byrne? The side that doesn't end up in prison for criminal negligence, Colin replied evenly. I've been reviewing Vincent's personnel file. Did you know he maintained top-secret clearance throughout his employment here? The boardroom fell silent as implications sank in. What exactly are you suggesting? Howard demanded. I'm suggesting that Vincent Riker may have been more than just your architect all these years. Before Howard could respond, the building's emergency system activated. Alarms blared as the automated voice announced, Structural Integrity Alert. Please evacuate immediately using designated emergency routes. Confusion erupted as board members gathered their belongings. Howard tried to restore order. Everyone stay calm. This is obviously Riker's doing, some kind of hack into our systems. The building shuddered subtly. Small particles of dust descended from ceiling tiles. Patricia Winters stood firmly. "I cannot. I'm leaving. I suggest everyone do the same." As the room emptied, Howard's phone rang. "Vincent again. What have you done?" Howard demanded. "I've activated the monitoring system I installed in Sullivan Tower 3 years ago," Vincent replied calmly. "The one you refused to pay for officially, so I implemented it anyway. It's detecting unusual stress patterns in the eastern support columns, exactly as predicted. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested for potentially saving hundreds of lives." The system is sending its data directly to the Department of Building Safety as we speak. They're dispatching structural engineers now. The building trembled again, more noticeably this time. "That wasn't an earthquake, Howard. That was material fatigue. The substandard concrete you substituted after final inspections is beginning to fail under normal stress loads." Howard looked out the boardroom windows to see people streaming out of the building onto the street below. "You won't get away with this. Whatever game you're playing." "This isn't a game," Vincent interrupted. "It's an intervention. Sullivan Tower is becoming unsafe and will be condemned by this afternoon. Sullivan Development will face investigations into every property in its portfolio. Your company is finished, Howard. Then I'll take you down with me. You designed these buildings. Your reputation. My reputation is secure. I've already provided authorities with documentation showing my original designs were altered after approval, including your signatures on the change orders." The line went dead as another, stronger tremor shook the building. Howard finally joined the evacuation, his face ashen. By nightfall, Sullivan Tower had been evacuated and surrounded by emergency vehicles. News helicopters circled overhead as officials from multiple agencies assessed the structure. The city's Department of Building Safety had issued emergency inspection orders for all Sullivan Development properties. Vincent watched the coverage from Phoenix Development's newly established headquarters across town. Melissa and Damon monitored communications as Howard Sullivan was interviewed on live television, looking disheveled and defensive. "Mr. Sullivan denies allegations of structural negligence," the reporter summarized, but sources within the department confirm that preliminary findings show significant deviations from approved architectural plans. Melissa muted the broadcast. "The stock is in free fall. Sullivan Development has lost 60% of its value since markets opened." "In Phoenix?" Vincent inquired. "Up 38% after announcing the emergency reinforcement program," Damon reported. "The mayor's office is calling you a public safety hero for exposing the issues." Vincent nodded, watching Sullivan Tower on the screens. "Howard will try to salvage what he can. Probably attempt to sell remaining assets before they're frozen." "Already happening," Melissa confirmed. 3 subsidiary companies have initiated paperwork for rapid ownership transfer. To whom? Shell corporations that ultimately trace back to Colin Byrne. Vincent smiled slightly. "So Colin's making his move earlier than expected." Good. Damon looked confused. "I thought Byrne was adversarial." "Colin Byrne is ambitious, unethical, and sleeping with my ex-wife," Vincent acknowledged. "He's also predictable and financially overextended. By attempting to acquire Sullivan assets, he's walking into the final phase of my plan." Vincent brought up documents on the main screen. "These are the hidden liens I placed against all Sullivan Development projects over the past 5 years. Small, strategic investments made through various intermediaries. Individually insignificant, but collectively, you own controlling interest in the debt structure," Melissa realized. "If Sullivan defaults." "When Sullivan defaults," Vincent corrected, "those assets don't go to Colin Byrne. They come to me." Chapter 8. Counteroffensive. Colin Byrne considered himself a master strategist. As chaos engulfed Sullivan Development, he methodically positioned himself to emerge from the wreckage with the company's most valuable assets. Howard had practically handed him control during the crisis, too consumed with saving his reputation to notice Colin's maneuvering. What Colin didn't expect was to find Vincent Riker waiting in his office at midnight. Breaking and entering now, Riker, Colin maintained his composure despite his surprise. It's not breaking when you have the access codes, Vincent replied, seated comfortably in Colin's chair. You've been busy today. 5 property transfers, 3 asset reallocations, and a very interesting wire transfer to a Cayman account. Colin poured himself a drink. I suppose you're here to gloat. You've destroyed Sullivan. Congratulations. Sullivan was destroying itself long before I intervened. I merely accelerated the timeline. Vincent indicated the chair opposite. I'm here to discuss your next move. My next move? Colin laughed. I'm salvaging what I can from this disaster. Self-preservation, while abandoning Howard and betraying Naomi in the process. You two make a perfect match. Loyalty isn't either of your strong suits. Colin's expression hardened. Let's dispense with pretense. We both know this was never about buildings. This was about Naomi choosing me over you. Vincent's smile was cold. Is that what you believe? That I orchestrated the downfall of a multi-billion-dollar corporation because my wife had an affair? He shook his head. That would be pathetic. Then what is this about? Justice. Consequences. The natural order reasserting itself. Vincent stood. Howard Sullivan built his empire by stealing other people's work. My father's, mine, countless others. You followed his example by taking what wasn't yours. Including your wife? Colin smirked. Naomi made her choice. As did you. Now you both face the consequences. Vincent placed a folder on the desk. Colin opened it to find documentation of his financial maneuvers, including the offshore transfers. How did you? I designed the Sullivan financial management system 5 years ago. Did you think I wouldn't build in monitoring protocols? Vincent circled the desk. The SEC will receive copies of these documents tomorrow morning unless you comply with my terms. Colin's arrogance faltered. What terms? Simple. The assets you've acquired return to their rightful owner, me. You resign from Sullivan Development and the industry entirely. And you never contact Naomi again. You're insane. I won't. Your alternative is federal prosecution for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Vincent headed for the door. You have until morning, Colin. Choose wisely. Meanwhile, Naomi paced her living room, watching coverage of Sullivan Development's implosion. Her phone rang. Howard again. Have you reached him? Howard demanded without preamble. No, Dad. Vincent isn't taking my calls. We need leverage. Something to force his hand. Naomi sank onto the sofa. I don't think we have any leverage left. He's outmaneuvered us at every turn. There must be something, Howard insisted. Some weakness we can exploit. The only weakness Vincent ever had was his loyalty to people who didn't deserve it, Naomi replied bitterly. And we destroyed that ourselves. Her doorbell rang. On her security monitor, she saw Melissa Joe waiting outside. I have to go, Dad. Naomi ended the call and opened the door cautiously. Melissa, this is unexpected. Mr. Riker sent me. Melissa stated professionally. He has a proposition for you. He couldn't deliver it himself. He's currently discussing similar terms with Mr. Byrne. Melissa handed Naomi an envelope. These are divorce papers. Mr. Riker is offering generous terms, including retention of this residence and a settlement that will ensure your financial security. Naomi opened the envelope with trembling hands. And if I refuse? There are no alternative terms, Mrs. Riker. Only consequences. Melissa's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I advised him to offer you nothing. The settlement was his idea. Why would he do this after everything? He said something about honoring the person he thought you were, rather than punishing the person you turn out to be. Melissa checked her watch. You have 24 hours to sign. A courier will collect the documents tomorrow evening. After Melissa left, Naomi reviewed the settlement terms. They were indeed generous, far more than she deserved under the circumstances. A note in Vincent's handwriting was attached to the final page. Consider this my final act as your husband. Choose your next steps carefully. As dawn broke, Vincent received confirmation that Colin had accepted his terms, transferring control of all acquired Sullivan assets to Phoenix Development and submitting his resignation. By noon, Howard Sullivan announced an emergency press conference. Gathered before a crowd of reporters, Howard looked defeated. After careful consideration and in light of recent structural concerns, I am announcing my retirement and the dissolution of Sullivan Development Corporation. As questions erupted, Howard raised his hand for silence. I take full responsibility for any construction irregularities and will cooperate fully with ongoing investigations. All Sullivan Development projects will be transferred to Phoenix Development, which has committed to addressing structural issues immediately. A reporter called out, "Mr. Sullivan, will you comment on rumors that Phoenix is led by your former son-in-law, Blake Riker?" Howard's jaw tightened. Mr. Riker is a gifted architect whose contributions to this city have been significant. Phoenix Development is fortunate to have his expertise. The press conference concluded abruptly when Howard appeared to suffer a minor medical episode, requiring assistance from staff. Watching from Phoenix headquarters, Vincent turned to Damon. "Arrange security for Howard's residence. Discreet but effective." Damon looked surprised. "You're protecting him? After everything?" "I'm ensuring he lives long enough to witness what comes next," Vincent clarified. "Howard needs to see his legacy completely transformed before he's allowed any peace." Melissa entered with an update. Naomi signed the divorce papers. "No contest, no modifications." Vincent nodded. "And Colin left town this morning. One-way ticket to Singapore." "He won't stay gone," Vincent predicted. "His type always believes they can return and rebuild." "Should we monitor him?" "No need. His finance and reputation are destroyed. Colin Byrne will spend the rest of his life trying to recover what he lost today." Vincent turned back to the city map displayed on the main screen. "Our focus now is reconstruction, beginning with Sullivan Tower." Chapter 9, The Shadow Cast. 6 months later, the building formerly known as Sullivan Tower had been completely renovated, reinforced, and rebranded as Phoenix One. Vincent's team had worked around the clock to address the structural deficiencies while simultaneously reimagining the building's purpose. What had once been a monument to corporate excess was now a mixed-use development combining commercial space with affordable housing, educational facilities, and community resources. The transformation had been documented in architectural journals worldwide, cementing Vincent's reputation as a visionary. On the evening of the grand reopening, Vincent stood in what had once been Howard Sullivan's office, now repurposed as an architectural history museum. Among the exhibits was a detailed timeline of the building's original construction, including documentation of Howard's cost-cutting measures and their potential consequences. "Quite an achievement," said a familiar voice. Vincent turned to see General Blackwood, now retired but still commanding respect in his civilian attire. "My father would have appreciated the symmetry," Vincent replied. "His reputation destroyed by Howard's father. Howard's legacy reclaimed by his son." The general surveyed the city through the panoramic windows. "Alexander would be proud of more than just the revenge, son. This rebuilding, it's what he always believed architecture should be. Service to community, not monuments to ego." A soft chime announced another visitor. Melissa entered with a tablet displaying security feeds. "Howard Sullivan has arrived as requested. Security has escorted him to the private elevator." Vincent nodded. "Show him in when he arrives." After Melissa and the general departed, Vincent studied the model of Phoenix, one displayed prominently on a pedestal. His original design, now fully realized without compromise. Howard entered moments later, looking significantly older than 6 months earlier. His health had deteriorated following the collapse of his company, though his financial future remained secure thanks to terms Vincent had privately arranged. "You wanted to see me," Howard stated flatly. "I wanted you to see this." Vincent gestured to the museum exhibits. The complete truth, preserved for future generations. Every decision, every shortcut, every consequence. Howard surveyed the displays with resignation. Public humiliation as your final revenge? Education, not humiliation. Future architects will learn from your mistakes. Vincent approached his former father-in-law. "Tell me something, Howard. When did you first realize who I really was?" "Too late, obviously." Howard sank into a chair. "There were signs I ignored. Your military bearing, your unexplained connections, the way you sometimes knew things you shouldn't have. Yet you never questioned it as long as I was making you rich. Howard looked up defiantly. And you never revealed yourself as long as the arrangement benefited you. We used each other, Vincent. The difference is that I never betrayed you. Even now, this building stands as a testament to what we could have accomplished together if you'd valued integrity over profit. Howard gestured to the exhibits. And Naomi? Is she featured in your museum of betrayal? Naomi made her choices. She's living with the consequences. Following the divorce, Naomi had relocated to another state. Her social standing diminished, and her relationship with Colin publicly exposed and terminated. Vincent had ensured she maintained financial stability, but had otherwise removed her entirely from his life. She asks about you sometimes, Howard mentioned. Wonders if you'll ever forgive her. Forgiveness implies continued engagement, Vincent replied evenly. I've moved beyond both of you. A subtle vibration indicated Vincent's phone. Checking it, he saw an alert from his security team. Colin Byrne had returned to the city and was attempting to access the reopening event. If you'll excuse me, Howard, it seems we have an uninvited guest. In the grand lobby, security had intercepted Colin attempting to enter with a counterfeit invitation. He was being held discreetly near the entrance when Vincent arrived. Bold move, returning on tonight of all nights, Vincent observed. Colin struggled to maintain his composure. I came to congratulate you. Professional courtesy. Your professional status was revoked months ago, along with your assets, reputation, and future in this industry. Vincent signaled security to release their hold. You're not even worth the scene your arrest would cause. You can't keep me away forever, Riker. This isn't over. Vincent studied the man who had contributed to destroying his marriage and career. Once handsome and confident, Colin now appeared desperate and diminished. It was over the moment you chose to align yourself with Howard Sullivan and betray my trust. Vincent turned to security. Escort Mr. Byrne off the premises. He's prohibited from entering any Phoenix property worldwide. As Colin was removed, Aaliyah Drake approached. Now Vincent's primary investment partner, she had become instrumental in Phoenix Development's rapid expansion. Problem? She inquired. Nothing significant. A shadow from the past. Aaliyah nodded toward the central display where Vincent's complete architectural portfolio was exhibited, including designs never built under Sullivan Development, but now planned for future Phoenix projects. Your vision is finally being realized without compromise, she observed. That must be satisfying. It's not about satisfaction, Vincent replied. It's about integrity. Buildings outlast their creators, Aaliyah. They cast shadows long after we're gone. Later that evening, as the celebration continued below, Vincent returned to the former Sullivan office, where Howard still sat contemplating the exhibits. You've won completely, Howard acknowledged. Destroyed what I built and replaced it with your own vision. What now? Now I continue building. The difference between us, Howard, is that destroying you was never my primary objective. It was simply a necessary step toward creating something better. Howard